The Nexus Transit Authority had spent approximately 14,000 years perfecting interdimensional travel, which made it all the more irritating that they couldn't figure out how to make their announcement system any less obnoxious. The synthetic voice that echoed through Platform 47B carried the particular brand of cheerful malice that only comes from centuries of bureaucratic evolution, announcing delays with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for a child's birthday party. Attention passengers waiting for transport designation Earth Sol 3 local. Your departure has been postponed indefinitely due to temporal flux irregularities. We apologize for any inconvenience and remind you that the Nexus Transit Authority is not responsible for existential crises resulting from extended waiting periods. If the announcement bothered the woman sitting on the bench, she gave no indication. She simply adjusted her worn jacket, peculiar earth garment that seemed designed more for aesthetic rebellion than practical warmth, and continued staring at the empty track with the sort of focused attention usually reserved for watching paint dry or contemplating the heat death of the universe. This had become something of a routine. Every cycle, precisely 47 minutes after the main hub's artificial dawn sequence, she would arrive at Platform 47B with a small bag, sit on the same bench and wait. The platform served routes to 17 different sectors of human-occupied space, though calling it occupied was generous considering most human colonies existed in a state of perpetual, barely controlled chaos that made frontier settlements look like paragons of urban planning. The Nexus itself sprawled across dimensions like a cosmic shopping mall designed by committee, if that committee consisted entirely of beings who had never actually used public transportation. Crystalline walkways twisted through probability fields, while transport pods hummed along magnetic rails that defied at least 3 fundamental laws of physics. Holographic displays flickered with departure times in 17 different languages, though notably, none of them ever seemed to apply to platform. What made the woman's vigil particularly amusing was that everyone, and when one said everyone, one meant literally every sentient being in the known galaxy, understood that Earth transport schedules were more theoretical than actual. Human transportation had achieved the remarkable feat of being simultaneously cutting-edge and completely unreliable. They had mastered faster-than-light travel but somehow couldn't manage to show up on time for anything. It was rather like watching a species that had invented teleportation but still got lost walking to the corner store. The other passengers gave Platform 40. Their experienced travelers knew better than to wait for Earth transports, which operated on what humans cheerfully called flexible time management and what everyone else called a cosmic joke. The platform had become something of a curiosity, like a museum exhibit dedicated to misplaced optimism. Yet there she sat, day after day, with the sort of determined patience that suggested either profound wisdom or a complete disconnect from reality. Given that she was human, both possibilities seemed equally likely. The woman appeared to be somewhere in that indefinable human age range where they stopped looking young but hadn't quite committed to looking old. Her dark hair was pulled back with the kind of practical efficiency that suggested someone accustomed to getting things done, even when those things involved waiting for transportation that existed more as a philosophical concept than actual service. She carried herself with the peculiar mixture of alertness and resignation that came from extensive experience with disappointment. Other passengers occasionally paused to stare. A cluster of Andromedan business travelers once spent an entire departure sequence pointing and chittering in their melodious language, probably placing bets on how long she would maintain her vigil. A group of crystalline beings from the Vega system had taken holographic recordings, no doubt for some sort of anthropological study on human behavioral anomaly. Even the station's maintenance drones seemed to have developed a grudging respect for her consistency, carefully cleaning around her rather than suggesting she move along. The platform itself had begun to accommodate her presence in small ways. The environmental controls had been adjusted to human-friendly parameters. The announcement system had started including updates specifically for Earth transports, though these updates consisted primarily of increasingly creative explanations for why nothing was actually departing. Someone, likely one of the more sympathetic station staff, had even upgraded the bench to a model with better back support. What fascinated observers most was her apparent lack of frustration. Other humans who found themselves stranded at the Nexus typically progressed through the standard emotional stages: confusion, anger, bargaining with customer service representative, and finally the peculiar human tendency to declare the entire situation ridiculous, while simultaneously adapting to it with remarkable efficiency. This woman had seemingly skipped directly to acceptance without bothering with the intermediate drama. She read some physical books which caused small crowds to gather, since most species had moved beyond such primitive information storage millennia ago. She also spent considerable time simply observing the flow of traffic through the main concourse, watching other species navigate their perfectly punctual travel arrangements with the sort of attention one might pay to a particularly engaging performance. The truly puzzling aspect was that she never seemed disappointed when the inevitable cancellation announcements came. If anything, she appeared to find them mildly entertaining, occasionally nodding as if the excuses confirmed some private theory about the nature of cosmic irony. Platform 47B had become her domain through sheer persistence, and persistence, as anyone familiar with human history could attest, was one of their few genuinely impressive qualities. They might not be the strongest, fastest, or most intelligent species in the galaxy, but their capacity for stubborn determination bordered on the supernatural. Which raised the obvious question: what exactly was she waiting for that was worth this level of dedicated patience? Because after 43 cycles of observation, it had become clear that whatever she expected to arrive on Platform 47B, it wasn't any train listed on the official schedule. Curiosity, as any respectable xenobiologist would attest, was the leading cause of poor decision-making among sentient species. It ranked just above mating rituals and slightly below recreational chemistry in the universal catalog of things that seemed like good ideas at the time, which explained why on the 44th cycle, instead of maintaining a sensible observational distance, one found oneself walking directly toward Platform 47B, with all the confidence of someone who had clearly not thought this through. The woman looked up as footsteps approached. Her expression held that particular blend of wariness and polite interest that humans seem to deploy when confronted with the unknown, which, given their recent introduction to galactic society, was essentially their default setting for everything. "Mind if I say?" The question emerged in standard Galactic, though her response would likely come in one of Earth's bewildering collection of regional dialects. Humans had somehow managed to develop over 6,000 distinct languages on a single planet, which struck most galactic citizens as either impressively inefficient or charmingly ambitious, depending on one's perspective on linguistic diversity. She gestured to the empty space beside her with the sort of casual politeness that suggested either genuine hospitality or complete resignation to the absurdity of her situation, possibly both. The bench had clearly been designed by beings who possessed a fundamentally different understanding of comfort than most carbon-based life forms. It managed to be simultaneously too firm and oddly yielding, like sitting on crystallized regret. Still, it offered an excellent view of the track where trains were supposed to appear but didn't, which seemed appropriate for the circumstances. Waiting long. The question was absurd, given the weeks of observation, but conversation had to start somewhere, and subtlety had never been a particular strength when dealing with humans. They seemed to appreciate directness, probably because their own communication styles tended toward refreshing bluntness. "Define long," she replied, which was exactly the sort of philosophically evasive response one had come to expect from her species. Humans had an remarkable talent for turning simple questions into existential discussions, usually without seeming to realize they were doing it. The accent was unfamiliar, not quite the clipped precision of the core world's contingent, or the flowing drawl of the outer rim settlers. Something else entirely, carrying hints of linguistic evolution that suggested geographic isolation or cultural stubbornness, possibly both. Knowing human, most beings would have given up by now, came the observation, carefully neutral. Earth transport services aren't exactly known for their reliability. This earned what humans called a smile, though the expression seemed to contain more layers than strictly necessary. "You've been watching." It wasn't a question, which was mildly unsettling. Humans had supposedly evolved as prey animals, yet they displayed a disturbing tendency toward observational awareness that made covert surveillance considerably more challenging than anticipated. Perhaps this explained their rapid technological development, despite their apparent talent for chaos. Professional interest seemed like a safer response than admitting to several weeks of fascinated confusion. Your species has a reputation for persistence. Stubbornness. You mean? She shifted position slightly, turning to face her unexpected companion more directly. It's not the same thing, though most people can't tell the difference. The distinction was intriguing, suggesting depths that hadn't been apparent from distant observation. Most species operated on fairly predictable behavioral algorithms. Survival, reproduction, social advancement, the usual biological imperatives dressed up in cultural variations. Humans seem to have added several entirely unnecessary complications to the basic programming. So which is this? Persistence or stubbornness? Depends on whether I'm right. The circular logic was distinctly human, displaying their peculiar talent for making simple concepts unnecessarily complex, while somehow managing to make perfect sense. It was rather like watching someone solve mathematical equations by inventing new forms of mathematics as they went along. The platform stretched before them, empty rails gleaming under artificial lighting that mimicked the spectrum of a dozen different suns. Other platforms buzzed with activity, sleek vessels arriving precisely on schedule, disgorging passengers who moved with the coordinated efficiency of species that had long ago mastered the basic logistics of existence. Transport announcements echoed through the cavernous space in orderly succession, each departure confirmation, another small victory for civilized behavior. Platform 47B remained stubbornly silent. May I ask what you're waiting for? The question felt presumptuous, but the woman had initiated this interaction by acknowledging the surveillance. Fair exchange seemed appropriate. She considered this for a moment, studying the empty track with the sort of intensity usually reserved for decoding ancient texts or calculating hyperspace trajectories, something that everyone else thinks is impossible. Most impossible things have a tendency to stay that way. Most things, she agreed, but not human things. The statement carried an undertone of something that might have been pride or might have been simple statement of fact. With humans, the distinction often proved meaningless. They seemed to treat their own improbability as a basic operating principle, rather than a statistical anomaly requiring explanation. A transport announcement echoed across the platform. Another arrival for the Centauri Express, right on schedule. Passengers disembarked with practiced efficiency, moving through the station like components in a well-designed machine. Everything functioned exactly as intended, which was probably why the woman's presence felt so conspicuously out of place. You're not from Earth, she observed, which demonstrated either impressive deductive reasoning or access to information that suggested more than casual interest in her situation. No, there seemed little point in elaborate deception, though I've been studying your species. Professional initially, the honesty felt unexpectedly liberating. Now it's more personal curiosity. She nodded as if this made perfect sense, which suggested either admirable adaptability or concerning naivety about the implications of being studied by unknown alien entity. Given human history, both responses seemed equally probable. Most species find us confusing, she said, settling back against the bench with the air of someone preparing for a longer conversation than originally anticipated. Confusing implies a puzzle with a solution. Your species seems more like a contradiction with delusions of logic. This earned an actual laugh, bright and genuine in the sterile atmosphere of the transit hub. That might be the most accurate description of humanity I've ever heard. The laughter transformed her face entirely, replacing careful composure with something more authentic and considerably more appealing. It also revealed that she had been maintaining a social mask throughout their interaction, which suggested depths of calculation that hadn't been apparent from surface observation. So, she continued, what exactly have your studies concluded about us contradictory humans? The question carried an undertone of challenge that was distinctly human. They seemed incapable of discussing themselves, without simultaneously defending and criticizing their own species. It was rather like watching someone argue with their own reflection. That you possess an alarming tendency to attempt impossible things and succeed through methods that violate basic principles of rational behavior. And that bothers you. It bothers everyone. Your species represents a fundamental challenge to established galactic wisdom about how intelligence develops and societies advance. She considered this with the sort of thoughtful attention that suggested the conversation had moved beyond casual pleasantries into territory that actually mattered to her.
Good, she said finally. Maybe it's time someone challenged that wisdom.
The silence that followed carried weight, as if the woman had just declared her intention to rearrange the fundamental constants of physics as a hobby project, which, knowing humans, wasn't entirely outside the realm of possibility. They had a documented history of treating universal limitations as mere suggestions rather than immutable laws. You speak as if you have personal experience with challenging galactic wisdom, came the careful probe. The conversation had shifted into territory that felt less like casual observation and more like intelligence gathering, though whether that intelligence was flowing in the expected direction remained unclear. She turned to study her companion more directly, and her gaze carried the sort of analytical intensity that suggested hidden depths beneath the surface of patient waiting.
I used to work for the Deep Space Exploration Initiative.
Before the funding got cut, before the politicians decided that sending humans into the unknown was too expensive and too dangerous, the revelation explained several things while raising considerably more questions. The Deep Space Exploration Initiative had been one of humanity's more ambitious failures, a program designed to push human presence beyond their relatively modest sphere of influence. Most galactic observers had viewed it as typical human overreach, a species that had barely mastered interplanetary travel, attempting to compete with civilizations that had been exploring space since before Earth's sun was a coherent thought. The initiative was disbanded 3 standard years ago. The statement was offered as fact rather than question, though confirmation would be appreciated. Officially, her tone suggested that official disbandment and actual cessation were different concepts entirely, which was disturbingly typical of human administrative practices. They seemed to excel at creating bureaucratic situations that existed in multiple contradictory states simultaneously. A transport announcement echoed through the platform, the Regal Express, departing precisely on schedule for the 7th time this cycle. Passengers boarded with practiced efficiency, their coordinated movements a testament to millions of years of evolutionary refinement and several thousand years of civilized behavior. The transport sealed itself and departed with a barely audible hum, disappearing into the probability streams that connected the station to the broader network of galactic civilization. Let me guess, the woman continued, settling back against the bench with the air of someone preparing to explain something complicated to someone who probably wouldn't understand it. Your studies of human behavior concluded that we're irrational, unpredictable, and prone to attempting things that sensible species would never consider. Among other observations, yes. But you never studied the initiative's final mission, did you? The one that supposedly never launched. The question carried implications that were beginning to feel uncomfortable. Most galactic intelligence agencies had written comprehensive reports on human space exploration capabilities, and those reports had concluded that the Deep Space Initiative represented more ambition than actual achievement. The official records indicated that their most advanced mission had been canceled due to technical limitations and budgetary constraints. Official records suggest that mission designation Horizon Deep was terminated during planning phases due to insufficient technological development, came the carefully neutral response. This earned another laugh, though this one carried undertones that were less amused and more knowing. Official records have a fascinating relationship with reality when it comes to human government projects. We excel at making things disappear from paperwork while the actual things continue existing in perfectly tangible ways. The implication was deeply unsettling, not least because it suggested human bureaucratic incompetence might actually be elaborate camouflage for activities that other species weren't supposed to notice, which would mean that galactic intelligence assessments of human capabilities were fundamentally flawed. A possibility that carried ramifications extending far beyond one woman's inexplicable waiting habits. Are you suggesting that Mission Horizon Deep actually launched? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating that 12 of our best people took an experimental vessel into uncharted space 47 cycles ago, and according to their mission parameters, they should be returning any day now. The casual delivery of this information was perhaps more alarming than the information itself. She spoke with the sort of matter-of-fact confidence that suggested either complete delusion or access to facts that had somehow escaped galactic attention. Given human history, both possibilities seemed equally disturbing. No human vessel possesses the capability for extended deep space exploration beyond established hyperspace routes. The objection felt necessary, though increasingly less certain than it had moments earlier. No human vessel that anyone bothered to tell the galactic community about, she corrected. We're surprisingly good at keeping secrets when we want to. Usually we just choose not to want to. This reframed humanity's apparent lack of security consciousness as a deliberate choice rather than an evolutionary oversight, which was somehow more concerning than simple incompetence. It suggested a level of strategic thinking that contradicted most assessments of human decision-making capabilities. You're waiting for a ship that supposedly doesn't exist, carrying people who supposedly never left, on a mission that supposedly never happened. That's an accurate summary of the situation. Yes. The matter-of-fact acceptance of apparent impossibility was quintessentially human. They seemed to approach logical contradictions with the same casual confidence other species reserved for discussing weather patterns or lunch preference. And you believe this non-existent ship will arrive at a platform that serves routes everyone knows don't operate on schedule. I believe that if you're going to build something in secret, and send it places nobody expects you to go, you probably want it to come back to a place where nobody expects it to arrive. She paused, watching a maintenance drone adjust environmental controls with mechanical precision. Platform 47B is perfect for that. Everyone knows Earth transports don't run on time, so nobody pays attention to the platform. It's hiding in plain sight. The logic was simultaneously flawed and brilliant, displaying the sort of counterintuitive reasoning that had apparently enabled humans to survive long enough to develop space travel, despite their obvious talent for finding new and creative ways to endanger themselves. How long are you willing to wait? However long it takes. She smiled again, and this time the expression carried undertones of something that might have been anticipation, or might have been quiet confidence in the face of cosmic odds. They told me it might be a while. They told you. Before they left, the mission commander said that if anything went wrong, if they had to take an unexpected route back, someone should wait. Someone who understood that schedules are suggestions and impossible just means nobody's tried hard enough yet. The conversation had ventured into territory that felt significantly less like casual interaction and considerably more like intelligence briefing from a source with access to information that wasn't supposed to exist, which meant that either this woman was delusional in ways that created remarkably coherent alternative realities, or galactic understanding of human capabilities required immediate and fundamental revision. Neither possibility was particularly comforting. The universe, as any philosophy student could attest, possessed a deeply annoying sense of timing. It was the sort of cosmic entity that would spend eons building suspense only to deliver its punchlines at the exact moment when one had begun to suspect the whole setup was elaborate performance art. Which was why, precisely 17 minutes into a conversation about impossible missions and non-existent ships, Platform 47B's announcement system crackled to life with something other than its usual litany of creative delay. Attention Platform 47B, incoming transport designation Horizon Deep requesting priority docking clearance. Estimated arrival in 4 minutes. The synthetic voice managed to sound surprised by its own announcement, as if the system had briefly forgotten how to process actual arrivals rather than theoretical ones. Throughout the main concourse, the steady rhythm of normal transit operations stuttered as other platforms' announcement systems seemed to pause in confusion. The woman beside the bench didn't move, but something in her posture shifted, a subtle straightening that suggested vindication rather than surprise. She had been expecting this. Horizon Deep, she repeated softly, as if testing the name's weight against reality. Right on time. By what possible definition of on time? The question emerged more sharply than intended, but the entire situation had moved beyond comfortable observation into territory that challenged fundamental assumptions about human competence. They said 47 cycles, give or take a few days for navigational complications. She checked a device on her wrist, a primitive timekeeper that seemed almost quaint compared to the station's sophisticated chronometry systems. Today makes 47 cycles in 6 days. That's practically Swiss precision by human standards. The casual reference to human cultural concepts was less important than the implication that a secret human vessel had managed to maintain a schedule across interstellar distances with greater accuracy than most established galactic shipping lines. This seemed to violate several basic principles about human organizational capabilities. A vibration ran through the platform as something massive approached through dimensions that weren't quite aligned with normal space. The sensation was familiar yet wrong, like recognizing a melody played in the wrong key. Whatever was arriving wasn't using standard transit protocols. They developed their own navigation system, the woman explained, apparently reading confusion from body language. Turns out that when you're going places nobody expects you to go, it helps to travel in ways nobody expects you to travel. The vibration intensified, and reality around Platform 47B began to take on the sort of flexible quality that suggested nearby manipulation of space-time. Other passengers in the main concourse started gathering at observation windows, drawn by the unprecedented sight of something actually arriving at the infamous Platform 47B. What emerged from the probability flux wasn't quite a ship in any conventional sense. It was more like controlled space that had decided to take the shape of a vessel, sliding into normal reality with the sort of casual confidence that suggested its creators had fundamentally reimagined the basic principles of transportation. The design carried elements that were recognizably human, angular efficiency mixed with organic curves, but executed with a level of technical sophistication that shouldn't have been possible given known human capability. Impossible, came the automatic response, though the evidence floating above Platform 47B suggested otherwise. That's what everyone said when we proposed the mission. The woman stood, shouldering her small bag with movements that carried sudden purpose. Impossible to build, impossible to navigate, impossible to survive. Turns out impossible is just another engineering problem when you're too stubborn to accept limitation. Docking procedures commenced with mechanical precision that would have impressed even the most critical transit authority inspector. Whatever else the humans had accomplished, they had clearly mastered the basic courtesy of not damaging station infrastructure while arriving in dramatic fashion. The main concourse had filled with observers, as word spread through the station's communication networks. Representatives from a dozen species gathered to witness what was rapidly becoming a significant revision to accepted understanding of human technological development. Several beings were taking recordings, probably for intelligence reports that would require extensive rewriting. The crew? The question felt necessary, though the answer seemed increasingly predictable. 12 humans went out. According to the passenger manifest I'm reading, 12 humans are coming back. She paused, studying data flowing across her primitive device, along with approximately 15,000 samples of previously unknown materials and what appears to be first contact documentation for 11 new species. The casual delivery of information that would revolutionize galactic politics suggested either impressive composure or dangerous disconnection from the magnitude of what was occurring. Knowing humans, both explanations seemed equally plausible. The vessel completed docking procedures and extended what was unmistakably a passenger boarding ramp, though one constructed from materials that seemed to shift between states of matter depending on viewing angle. A hatch opened with the sort of soft mechanical whisper that suggested engineering philosophy fundamentally different from galactic standard approaches. Figures began emerging from the ship, humans, obviously, but humans who carried themselves with the particular confidence that came from having successfully completed tasks that everyone else had deemed impossible. They moved with economy and purpose, carrying equipment and samples with practiced efficiency. The woman walked toward the ramp, and one of the returning crew members, distinguishable by additional equipment and what might have been command insignia, broke away from the group to meet her. Their embrace was brief but carried the sort of emotional weight that suggested relationships extending beyond mere professional association. "You waited," the crew member said, loud enough for observation from the bench. "You said you'd be back." "I said we'd try to be back." "Same thing." The exchange was typically human in its ability to compress complex emotional and logical concepts into simple statements that somehow conveyed more meaning than elaborate speeches. It also demonstrated their remarkable talent for treating successful completion of impossible tasks as if they were routine achievements. The crew member turned toward the bench, where one alien observer sat in a state of rapidly readjusting worldview. "Your friend there looks like they've just had their understanding of physics personally insulted by reality." "Professional hazard of studying humans," the woman replied. "We have a tendency to make universal constants look more like gentle suggestion."
As the crew began unloading equipment that defied classification according to established technological categories, and as station authorities scrambled to process documentation for discoveries that would reshape galactic scientific understanding, one thing became abundantly clear: the woman had not been waiting for trains that never came. She had been waiting for humans who never failed to arrive, regardless of what everyone else considered possible. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. It just happened to appreciate the sort of jokes that required 47 cycles of setup and challenged the fundamental assumptions of advanced galactic civilization. Platform 47B, after weeks of embarrassing emptiness, had finally justified its existence by proving that sometimes the most important arrivals are the ones nobody expects to happen.